Yeah. All right, awesome. Let's get started. It's my honor to introduce Ben Recht, who's a professor at Berkeley in the ACS department. He's the author of 3 books, Optimization for Border Data Analysis, with our very own. We're still. Yeah, all right. Well, he also wrote Patterns, Predictions, and Actions with Maurice Hart, and now the Irrational Decision, which is what I think Ben talked about to us today. Ben is the recipient of many awards, including the Presidential Early Career Award, the Sloan Award, and the Lagrange Prize in Optimization. And he may also be the only person I know with 2 Test of Time Awards at NeurIPS, which allegedly is his favorite conference. He also spends, by his own admission, too much time blogging at argmin.net. And for those of you that may not know, Ben was on the CS faculty here at the University of Wisconsin. And perhaps of equal anecdotal importance, a lot of people that are somehow connected to him, they've passed through here either as faculty candidates or colleagues themselves. And I am one of them, by the way. And Madison loves Ben, and I think Ben also loves Madison back. And since I was his postdoc, I would like to share maybe one lesson that I took from him, which is basically question everything. So it doesn't matter if a benchmark is a benchmark, and do not trust the result because it's a NeurIPS paper, and definitely do not trust the opinion because it comes from a self-proclaimed expert. And carrying this habit around can be sometimes painful and occasionally can make you the annoying co-author or person in the audience that asks funny questions. But for me, it's a lesson that has never led me wrong, and I owe that Ben. And I think part of today's talk is perhaps a much bigger version of this, about how a framework for machines in the 40s ended up defining rationality, where that framework breaks, and why human judgment cannot be outsourced. With that, please welcome Ben.
So great to be back here in the WID. Usually we were on 4 before. They bumped us down.
Louis here.
So it was on 3?
Yeah. Louis here.
What do I know, guys? There you go. There it is. All right. So I'm being corrected, and this is what happens when you're stay away for too long. But it's amazing to come back to Madison, see all the things that are so different, and yet some things that are always the same. And I think that's kind of a little bit of it's an interesting parable for this talk, because Madison's been doing computer science for about as long as anybody else. And you'll see like a lot of the history, little fragments of that history here. So yeah, this is a book. It's out now, Princeton University Press. I'm not really gonna, maybe if in the Q&A, I could tell you how I walked myself into writing this book. But rather than spending too much time about me, let me tell you a little bit about what the story is and what questions I was trying to answer. And the big question was trying to get at the heart of what is rational. I think rationality is one of these funny words. It means a lot of things to a lot of people. And there's nothing wrong with that. Like a lot of times we kind of project rationality onto decision making. Like when we look at whether or not you should go have some very risky experimental surgery, you might ask yourself, well, what are the costs and benefits associated with that? And those cost-benefit analyses go from very high-stakes things, sometimes down to low-stakes things. And you could ask yourself, what's the cost-benefit analysis of breaking from my healthy diet and having a slice of pizza today? Maybe I could write that also as a cost-benefit analysis. And then we look at our children, and we want them to do well. That's well, the only thing we want for our children and the young people is to do well. And we think, well, what's the cost-benefit analysis of violin lessons? And then you start to go to sports, and everything also now has become cost-benefit analysis and whether or not you should make some play at some different time. And it's very weird that somehow what it means to be rational is that you take the actions that are supposed to, given the knowledge that you have, most likely give you the best payoff. And it's a little bit of a weird thing that turns every single decision-making problem, the rational answer is to treat every decision-making problem like you are an actuary who's just pricing insurance, or perhaps that you're a gambler who is someone who is just trying to figure out what the best thing to bet on is. But what's weird is that's, I think if you go and look around what people who call themselves rationalists these days, that's how it gets pitched. But the history of rationality is very different. In fact, the old history of rationality is almost culty. Pythagoras is probably kind of attributed as being the person who kind of founds all of our the historical notions of rationality. he actually had a little religious cult behind him who thought that they could derive everything about the universe and existence in terms of beautiful mathematical formulas. And sometimes that works for, uh, the for music, relationship of intervals in music, and they thought they can describe the equations of all the universe also just with simple math. But over time, that word has taken on a lot of different meanings. And now it means a lot of things, like I said, to a lot of people. It just mean that you're a reasonable person. You behave within reason. It means that you have a consistent belief system. That's what could also mean to be rational. Or that you act within social norms. But it's this last one where you somehow use facts to attain goals. That's the one that seems to be the real predominant one, especially amongst our community. So if you ask anybody what it means to do a rational choice, that. And certainly that's something that I think for this seminar would be the thing that people would come in and would say, well, a rational agent would do this. But I think the only thing consistent about all of these definitions is that rational is good and irrational is bad. It's a very odd thing. So what I was trying to figure out is what is this bottom one, this use facts to attain goals? Where did that rationality come from? This is one that's very much like a mathematical rationality. It seems that just like Pythagoras, we have a new version of rationality that we can use to make and inform every decision. But that rationality is very odd because everything becomes this cost-benefit analysis and maximizing the expected value of utility. What's very interesting to me and where this book came from is that setting up this whole structure of utility maximization in this nice mathematical framework required machines to actually compute expected values and pick the optimal one. And so you had this growth after World War II in designing these machines to make optimal decisions. And in designing the machines, that led us to decide what rationality was. And so this mathematical rationality is the rationality of computers. And if you look at the kind of just the legacy, and actually I love this next slide because I feel like this next slide is like legacy of the Silo seminar. Just look what happens between 1943 and 1950. Okay, 1943, the invention of the neural network. 1948 or 1945, depending on who you ask, the invention of information theory. And Wiener might even say he invented information theory and it was stolen from him. But Wiener actually, the important thing of this book is this is where all of our business about doing average case estimation comes out of this really nice book by Wiener from 1948. The first systematic medical trial applying medical statistics to people is 1946. What does that say? Well, it's published in 48, but it was done in 46. So there we go. Published in 48. Game theory, 1944. Linear programming, again, depending on who you ask, 1948. And stochastic gradient descent, obviously, AGI, 1951. Right, so all of those things happen all in the same window. And those are all happening before we have computers, which is also crazy, right? So all these things that lay the foundation for what we do now and for how we would define what it means to make rational decisions, all of the math is set up, and then the machines get going. And the next thing you know, those machines grow faster than we get smarter. And we convince ourselves that actually is the way to make rational decisions. So we take the minds of these gentlemen and we build an entire industry upon it. And then we come out the other side with people like this telling us that we should be more like computers. And that's kind of the story, or at least the lineage I wanted to trace in the book. And so what I do that in 4 chapters, each of them kind of like their own little independent story, but they're very much linked together, where I kind of build like pillars for this rationality. I could be honest with my Wisconsin friends, a lot of these pillars, again, came out of starting this seminar with Rob 15 years ago. Like a lot of these things were seeded in ideas that I've been talking about with folks at Wisconsin for a long time. So one pillar is optimization, can't avoid optimization. Game theory was the second one I spent a lot of time on. The third one is randomized experiments, which is weird because you're not going to see a computer anywhere here, but all of the decision is computerized. Meaning you don't even need, you could do it on an abacus, but the whole point is that we are making these decisions in this very programmatic way. And then the last one is statistical prediction, which we now call, I don't know what we call it. For a while, we called it machine learning. What do we call it now? Demetrius, want to just predict the next token? Whatever. Yeah, money. We call it big cash money, right? And so the story here is that like each of these provides amazing powers for decision making, but they're really powerful in the right sweet spots. But if you try to shoehorn every single decision into them, you can run into a variety of different, sometimes funny and sometimes not so funny conundrums. So this is the fun part of a book talk. I can't tell you about all 4 chapters because that would just be machine gunning it. So I picked one, and I know Jeff has already seen this one, but I think nobody else here has. So I decided to do optimization because when I came here to Wisconsin, I was part of the optimization cluster at the WID, and I feel like this is just gotta go back to my roots. And that's what I'm doing here. So let's talk about optimization. This is also amazing to me. The reason why I picked this one, I taught linear programming here for the first time, kind of learned how to teach linear programming. And I will have some commentary on my linear programming class in a couple of slides. So where does mathematical optimization, I think if you could trace back to, I don't know, Cauchy and Newton, maybe Newton. But really the modern version doesn't kick off until Danzig. Now, why? It's easy to pose optimization problems, or at least think about them, and think about like you maximizing things. But you need computers. Like anyone who has taken linear programming, do we still torture people with the simplex with
no templates?
No templates. Shit. Well, see, but now they can't appreciate that if you're trying to solve linear programs by hand, it doesn't go very well. You get stuck in very small problems, right? And so the whole point of the vision of mathematical optimization is that if I had these computing machines, I could solve these problems that didn't seem to be attached to actual planning. You can get optimal things under certain models, and we'll see that in a second. And what was interesting is that then, if you want to build better computers, you actually need optimizers too. We'll get to both of those points. So linear programming was invented in, this slide says 47, by George Danzig. Danzig is a very interesting guy. So he came up through World War II so he got his PhD at Berkeley, went into the Air Force in World War II, and more or less was running a data science division where they were collecting all these things, making all these tables, trying to figure out where they were going to send various bits by air, where they were going to deploy troops. And Danzig was rather frustrated with the way that those decisions were made. They would make these beautiful statistical tables, they would show them to people up the chain, and then he just thought that a lot of the decision-making was what he called ad hoc. So he, in reflections that he wrote in 1982, he found that you would ask a leader, what's the goal? Ask a military leader, what's the goal that we have in mind with this particular troop deployment? And the general would say, the goal is to win the war. Not necessarily helpful, right? And then we say, if you want them to be more explicit, they say the way that you win the war is by building more battleships, right? And so what Danzig wanted was to deconflate the means and the objectives. And linear programming lets you do this. So the ability to state general objectives and then find optimal policy solutions to practical decision problems of great complexity is a revolutionary development. I don't think he is wrong about this at all. Completely transforms the way you think about planning. Is if I could write down a set of rules and then get an optimal answer, that's completely different than having to just figure out how to decouple people's different biases about what are what's the right ship that you want to build. So this was like the first, the abstract of the first paper, linear programming method. This was presented here in 1948 at a conference on econometrics that had had all of those people who are listed on the top were actually at this meeting in Madison in 1948. This is, I'll tell you a little bit more about linear programming in a minute. You probably already know, but the important thing to highlight from this abstract is that this bottom line, which I think is also amazing, that even before computers existed, this is like the #1 rule of computer science. It is proposed that the computational techniques such as those developed by von Neumann and the author, be used in connection with large-scale digital computers to implement the solution of programming problems. Here he was already saying, like, what we need are large scale computing. So, and I love that it's always large scale. So that's the thing. Computer science has always been about, I need a bigger computer. What?
The physicists are even worse with their Excel.
Oh, they're even worse. All right, we can blame the physicists. Yeah, physicists might be worse. When he gave that talk in Madison, Harold Hotelling was there, and he said something which people have said this to me before too, that the world is nonlinear. The world is nonlinear, and Hotelling is not wrong. I think it's important for us all to keep in mind. He's not wrong that the world is nonlinear. But von Neumann replied to him, look, that if you have a problem where these axioms hold, then you could use it. And so the whole goal of the game is figuring out what problems can I write as linear equations with non-negativity constraints and linear costs. It is a little bit of a weird game because not every problem is going to fit in there, but maybe we can change the game so it does. And it's almost this thing that a lot of optimizers know, is that when you have a tool that works, you see it everywhere, whether or not you necessarily want to apply it. The key idea from the beginning in optimization is we want to engineer to make sure that our axioms are true, and all of those messy things, we just don't want to get into the places where those nonlinearities do occur. So what's a good example where the axioms of linear programming are true? I need linear equations, non-negativity constraints, and linear cost. So the first example comes from diet. I need to tell you a little bit of history about diet. Last time I came to Madison, I talked about vitamins. Vitamins are this amazing thing that we all take for granted and are sold by hucksters on Instagram now. But if you don't get enough vitamins, you will die. And this was an amazing revolution in the early 1900s. If you're at Madison and you don't know, you're in the building named. Go downstairs and learn about Steenbach. Madison was one of the most important universities on the planet in the development of the discovery of vitamins. And what are vitamins? They're like these little things that your body can't make. You have to eat. So there's special little biological chemicals that you can't make. And so people were having these diseases that everybody thought were germ-based or transmitted respiratory diseases, but it turned out that they just had bad diets. And you could cure the disease immediately by just giving them a little bit of milk or giving them a little bit of brown rice. And it is kind of remarkable that all of these things that were causing scourges all over the planet, tons of different diseases, were all cured by finding the appropriate vitamin and updating people's diets. And so this all happened over the course from 1910s into the 1930s. Now, why am I telling you about vitamins again? Well, our friends in the federal government, once they had this information, wanted to try to convince people that eat more balanced diets. You guys have all heard of the balanced diet. The balanced diet comes out of this idea of vitamins. There are certain things that you need to eat. It's not just get your protein macros. You also want to make sure that you are eating a well-balanced diet that hits all of these vitamins. And if you look at the first USDA guidelines, they don't actually mention vitamins at all. They were trying to kind of promote here just your normal food groups, but they didn't really consider vitamins. So Hazel Stiebling, who was trained as a chemist, she got a PhD in chemistry, ended up at the USDA and was put in charge of home economics, which meant something very different than it does today. This really was a very important thing about trying to figure out how that. I don't know what we've changed the name to now, but this is just like making recommendations for how people should run their. It's a little complicated because it sounds so paternalistic, but how you maybe should advise people to run their houses. What should you eat? What should you? How should you save? These sorts of things. And so she, since she was trained as a chemist, knew about vitamins, and she published the first diet plans that actually included recommendations that would cover all of the vitamins. And actually, she's the person who came up with this term dietary allowances, which we still use. And so this is her guideline published by the USDA. It has this thing which says that cost alone is not a measure of the desirability of diet. I want to clarify real quick. So she's very, very upfront. Cost is important, but it's not the only important, right? You need nutritive value and cost are considered together when you're working this whole thing out. And we're also dealing with the fact that families who have limited amounts of money might have to deal with a minimum cost diet, right, rather than having the splendor of a full diet. So I could share these with you later, but there's a liberal diet, which lets you eat all sorts of things. And then there's this minimum cost adequate diet, which means if you have to cut some things out, this would be like the bare minimum. I think it would cost like $100 a year for a family. This is $100 a year for a person. But for larger families, maybe a few $100s a year. But this is in 1939 dollars. There's depression. I think it would be more now. So George Stigler saw this report and was deeply annoyed. So I don't know if you guys know who George Stigler was. He did mathematical and statistical research on the Manhattan Project, but he's a very famous Nobel Prize-winning economist. This is the man who invented the term regulatory capture. So we have the person who invented dietary analyses, the person who invented regulatory capture, and they got into a little bit of a academic fight. He saw the term minimum cost and was triggered. He's like, there's nothing minimum cost about it. I want to find the minimum cost diet. And he wrote a paper called The Cost of Subsistence, which is, they published in the Journal of Farm Economics. And so what he did is he looked at what the recommended daily allowances are for a man weighing 154 pounds. 3,000 calories seems a bit extreme to me, but we can start to understand the obesity epidemic that maybe we do. But they had all the lists of all the different vitamins on it. And he also went and got from the Department of Agriculture a list of all the associated prices of different ingredients. So this is 77 different ingredients on here. You kind of zoom in, you have flour. There's a lot of redundancy. You can see there's flour, there's cornmeal, there's grits, all sorts of things that you could buy and you could put together. He was like, I'm going to, from this, actually come up with one that's minimum cost. That's crazy is like, so again, now this is 45, right? So this is before Danzig. But if you think about it for a second, the diet problem is a beautiful linear program, right? Because if I increase some nutrients by a little bit, it goes up in a linear fashion, right? So that these constraints are all, both the cost increases linearly and the nutrients increase linearly. And amounts are always non-negative. So this was the first linear program invented about, maybe Kantorovich was a little bit earlier, but I'm going to call this one the first linear program. It was invented in 1945, and Stigler just solved it by hand, or at least like tried to solve it by hand. And he got pretty good. So he got it down to 39.93, right? This is like much less than Carpenter and Stiebling. I see you're laughing. You don't like this diet?
This is not a doctor.
But wait.
That's it?
Hold on a second. We got 1 pound of flour a day, 2 ounces of evaporated milk, 5 ounces of cabbage, 1 ounce of spinach. You don't want that, Carl?
No, we do not.
I have a recipe that you I like this recipe. It's called Lavani Georgian bean pie. This is actually, my wife is a baker. She has a bunch of really cool baking cookbooks, and this was in there. My wife is also a professor, but whatever. So on the side hustle, does baking. So here, this is, look at, I guess it calls for milk, and we can replace the lard and the baking drippings with milk. I think that will add some fat. We get rid of the butter because we can't afford butter. And then I guess I feel like I could have left baking powder in, but I took that out. And then no salt is allowed, I guess. Well, we got close. Don't want to eat that. It is pretty gross. Let's come back to that thought. No. The thing that's funny is that the actual optimal solution was computed by Danzig. He worked with the Mathematical Tables Project because a lot of bureaucrats in Washington were pretty mad at Stigler, just thought that he had made a mistake. So Danzig went to it. The Mathematical Tables Project was this amazing work project act during the Great Depression, where they paid people to sit in front of mechanical calculators and like write out the digits of E and write out all these complicated integrals. And we still have a lot of these books. So you ever see like a book that has numerical integration in it, a lot of them were done by the Mathematical Tables Project, which is people being hand calculators. And, so they were like the computers, and he got a bunch of them together, with 120 person hours, found the actual minimum cost diet, and it was $39.69. So that's about, a little bit less than Stigler, but it required a lot more time. I think the lesson from that, though, right, is that experts can optimize or get pretty close to optimal, but it can be automated. You can take the discretion away from the expert and put it into the machine, and that will foreshadow into the next part of this talk. All right, but let's go through our amazing. So I think the thing that is funny is that it's not a diet, right? Like this, and I think this is why it's so hilarious that we still teach it in our, like, I taught the diet problem as a little bit of a jokey toy, but I never knew any of this history. Way back when I was doing 525, it is kind of funny that it tells you just blindly optimizing gives you some really gross answers. This one, and moreover, as Stigler pointed out, and he was pretty clear-eyed about this, like the models themselves are wrong. We don't really know what the allowances are for any given person. So, and it's not even clear, like if I give you an apple, how much nutrition is in that particular apple. So these things are all a little bit off, but we force them to be true to have this kind of like simple model. But like, as we know, like part of diet is, and Stiebling said this in her report, it's not just cost. It's not just cost. There's all sorts of things that we derive as humans eating together, or eating by ourselves. And I think conceptualizing everything as optimization can often cause more harm than good. But Stigler wasn't actually recommending that you eat this. He was more just recommending that people in Washington shouldn't be making suggestions. There's these cultural judgments, while they appear modest enough to government employees and even to college professors, can never be valid in such general form. So he was almost saying from the beginning that the diet problem is ridiculous. Look at all these modeling assumptions and look what comes out yesterday.
In defense of optimization, you can put limits on the amounts of each thing and still linear progression. You can say you don't want more than 10 pounds of beans a week. So I wouldn't use it as a blanket indictment of optimization. You can fix the model and re-optimize.
Yes, but then how would you respond to his footnote? Anyway, I just love that footnote. That's the meanest footnote ever. I know Steve's upset because I get it. This is a very interesting counterplay. Yes, you could fix the model and we could make it more complicated, right? But if we needed to make it more complicated, we couldn't solve it with the people at the Mathematical Tables Institute.
If you just got a few more bounds, it wouldn't be that much more complicated.
Well, hold on a second. We'll see where we go. But it is an interesting counterplay here. Yes. So like Stiebling, it's very interesting, would end up just becoming the director of the Institute of Home Economics for the USDA. She was responsible for launching our first school lunch programs. She really was behind a lot of projects that were popularizing fruits and vegetables. Stigler, on the other hand, like I said, was promoted a lot of right-wing economic theories. Was really big into it. I think Stigler's the guy who was like, if your airplane is not boarding by the time you get to the gate, then you've wasted time. They're very much a big kind of standard run-of-the-mill Chicago economist, which is where he ended up. So it's a very interesting. You have a real interesting interplay of American thinking. Two different strains of American thought kind of playing out in these early days of optimization. Go on to kind of play out into a battle that we still see today between a technocratic view on the left and a much more laissez-faire kind of right. But that politics aside, the more important question is Steve was telling me, well, what we could do is just add some bounds, be a little bit more reasonable, and then we can solve the problem better. But to do that, you need bigger computers. And Danzig knew this. He, after the war, was actually a program manager at the Air Force. And so he started funding people to build all sorts of different machines. And the one that he probably was most responsible for was a computer called the SEAC, which was made at NIST, which was the first stored memory kind of von Neumann architecture machine that actually was up and running because the UNIVAC was shipping and wasn't. So the SEAC beat out the UNIVAC. And I think Danzig ended up throwing like $500,000 or $1 million at these computing projects in the 40s. And so now the first computer in 1951 is actually solved by first LP is actually solved by a computer in 1951. This one was just a 10-person assignment problem. It's 100 variables and 20 constraints. and it took the SEAC 3 minutes, and then they couldn't add extra stuff. And then the 704 would come along in a few years, and now we can start pushing, right? The 704, if you guys don't know, the 704 is like this is the first general purpose AI computer. On the 704 was the first chess playing machine. It was the first checkers playing machine. It was the first time anybody ran the perceptron was on a 704, and it was like the first digit recognition experiments were all done on the 704. It's an absolutely incredible computer, and it had 12,000 floating point operations per second. At the time, that's so it also became much easier to solve LPs on this machine. And so at the RAND Corporation, they were able to now get up to 255 constraints. Now we're starting to get into Steve's territory where I can put bounds in the amount of beans. But yet again, they kept running into these walls. Well, it seemed like we can get unlimited variables. We were stuck at a certain constraint number. And again, solving bigger linear programs requires more machine improvements for greater speed. So the rest of the chapter kind of goes through how we keep making the faster we make our computers, the more complicated we end up making our optimization routines. And you kind of could trace all the history of all the fun things that happen as you move through, like a large period being on the 704, but then kind of in the 60s, you're starting to move to more sophisticated transistor machines. And, I think we all know what happens after that. So these machines keep getting faster and faster and faster. What's so interesting about the machines getting faster is what was enabling that speed was actually more optimization. So part of once you start to get to this kind of complexity on the chip, what you start to do is that now I need computer programs to design the next computer.
Exponential self-improvement. Very good.
There it is. There it is. Exponential self-improvement. So the first exponential self-improvement, a lot of the work that actually was, this was actually done where my current institution, UC Berkeley, was on modeling how these things work, building abstraction layers to kind of stack them together, and then building really cool computer-aided design tools based on optimization to stitch out, lay out, and route computers. And so the 386 was actually based on a lot of these kind of optimization-based tools. And now we get ourselves back to today. We have this thing that had 12 kiloflops in 1954, and now I feel like I always have to constantly update these things. Yeah, I keep being told that Moore's law is going to end, keep packing more teraflops onto these things. So this is probably not quite right, but let's say 2 teraflops on the GPU alone on this stupid phone, which is crazy. Yeah, there you go for scale. There's my iPhone in the machine room. So I think it's kind of what I think is I want you to maybe take away from that this tour of the optimization chapter. Look, we made insane leaps in computing, and every time we made insane leaps in computing, we thought our computers weren't fast enough. And I feel like that's still true today because there's some stuff I really wish I could run. But what was amazing is that the computer chip was like the ideal platform for optimization. It was the thing that you could always optimize, because if you can get it off the assembly line and it passes tests, you just like seal it in epoxy and it works forever. But all of the physical stuff was a little bit trickier. Like the stuff that involves people was always harder, because these clean abstraction boundaries and these clean models don't always work, and you have to add extra complexity. So it's fair that you could add, like Steve kept pointing out, you could add bound constraints. We could add maybe some kind of integer constraints, but it should be like don't want to buy half a can of beans. And we can start adding. How would I add a mixed integer constraint, Jeff? We can add a mixed integer constraint. I'm sure it can do it. I'm sure it can do it. And you get greater and greater sophistication, but you always are running into this issue that even just defining what the cost is a challenge, and it's something that can change depending on people's values. So that's the tour of that first chapter, that mathematical optimization chapter. We kind of there's all of the chapters have a kind of similar theme, which is like if you put them in the right places, all of these tools are incredibly powerful. But in the wrong places, yeah, they could be a little bit thin. So for mathematical optimization, we can get massive scaled productivity, but we need very particular controlled settings to apply it. The game theory chapter is controversial for anybody who's into game theory. But this is my take. I think game theory is underappreciated for how much we learned about games. which are an important part of human existence, just like eating. I don't think that we should just downplay getting new insights into how to play chess or poker. On the other hand, it is a complete failure when it comes to trying to describe how people act, which was its initial goal. Randomized experiments, I kind of go into how they became the backbone of policymaking, especially in medicine, but actually as a way to find cause and effect have been very much less powerful than optimized. But as a way to dictate how to approve drugs and how to approve different procedures, incredibly powerful. And then there's machine learning, which, is pretty powerful and it gets more powerful every day. But I argue that uninterpretability is kind of the price of admission when we were going down that path. And maybe that's fine, but we gotta at least know it going in. The book closes with a discussion about kind of where I wanted to start, which is that like we could pose a lot of different problems in all the different aspects of this problem as utility maximization, but it was a very like computerized rational model. And the question is, what do people do? Like, are we maximizing? What are our constraints? I have colleagues at Berkeley. I actually realized in retrospect that like this book would not have happened had I been here. It would have been very different. I think if you sit in the Bay Area enough and you hear faculty members telling us about how rational action is just maximizing the right objective function, and that we can align all this artificial intelligence by like making sure its objective function is correct. I start to go crazy. Because while it's certainly true that like computers, maybe like there is a certain rationality that we can attach to computers, people definitely don't do this. In fact, there's 75 years of research confirming that people just do not make mathematically rational decisions. And you could think of that one of two ways. Either that means that people are hazardous because they're not obeying, like, they don't do Bayes' rule in their head. So that means that, they're a danger to society. Or you could think, well, actually, they're doing something much more sophisticated, and we just haven't been able to pin it down. And in fact, maybe what the interesting part of people is the fact that they are so hard to box into computers. All the stuff that's easy to write down, give that to the machine. People can be maybe the remainder. I don't think it's that simple. I do think that there is something interesting about very repeatable, measurable, quantifiable things. Those are computerized. And in fact, that's almost like the definition of computer. And so much of what's enabling about thinking computationally is noting that there are certain things that you can quantify, that you can measure, that you can do repeatedly, and then we could just automate. But I still feel like there are lots of things that are singular and unverifiable. And those things will never be put onto a computer. And our judgment and the way that we think about those things, I mean, that's why we're here. I don't think that we have to exclude ourselves or commit to everything, to all of existence, maximizing some simple formula. So I have a bit of a discussion in the end there. The way I like to think about that is like the difference between rules for games and playing games. Because they're different. Allowing for improvisation inside of a game, putting rules on things allows for improvisation, and I think that's the kind of tension that that's kind of worth picking out between that can be systematized and that which can't. And I also kind of talk a little bit about Joseph Weizenbaum's distinction, which I like. This is pure semantics. That there's a difference between deciding and choosing. And choosing is the moral act. So I have a little bit of a discussion of how Weizenbaum sets that up in the book that he wrote in the 70s. But yeah, I think that somehow we're going to have to figure out some way to move forward in this. Like computers have really come a crazy long way since 1945. It is funny to me that the foundations were laid before we ever had the computer. Then the computer just got faster. And they did get faster than we can get smarter. But now the question is, what's next? What's next? I think we're at the end of this exponential scaling. And so the answer would just be we cover the Earth in data centers and some batteries. That could be it. That could be the answer. But I feel like we're at an interesting pivot, and we're all going to have to start asking ourselves these questions. I don't buy into the idea that we are going to be automated away. I think there is still a distinction of what's automatable and what's not. and what's worth doing and what's not. And that's, I think, where I'll leave it off. We could choose to change the rules if we don't. All right, I'll leave it there. If you guys are interested, I made a QR code just for you. Also, I post random thoughts a few times a week on this blog. Don't bug me there. I always enjoy it. And again, thank you guys for having me back. Always love coming to Madison, and I'd love to chat more about this. I'll hang out for a bit. And yeah, thanks again. Guy first, go ahead, man.
Can you give an example of singular and unverifiable? Maybe 2 examples.
You just asked me a question. No, not singular. You think that's a? I feel like these interactions that we have. This is what I mean by the singular. You and I are going to have these things.
I mean, so you mean that whatever involves
the love of your daughter is singular and
that's true, but
I think
I think it is verifiable.
Yeah.
By proxy. I mean, you can do good things for kids and you can do crappy things for the kids, and that to some degree reflects perhaps the amount of love. Right.
But I think that's the hard part. Is and I think that's the fun part about being here. We can kind of hash out and discuss what that means. And we hash that out and discuss that with our family, friends, and I think that's it's not a fixed target.
It's not, but you do arrive at something in the end that makes you feel like now I actually can measure something to some degree, even though that's not accurate.
And you can put a number on it,
process, but it does not mean it won't eventually come to some degree.
Yeah. I think I see what you're asking, Demetrius. I do think that one thing I did not get to really engage with this book, and it's something there is a long legacy of this. There's this weird behind all of this is a weird specter of quantification. Like what we have this issue of when we're building a big society. We don't necessarily have to do this at home, but people start doing this at work. We're building a big society. That big society needs some way of understanding what's on the ground. In order to make it legible, we're I'll come up with some kind of summary. The best way to make something legible is to make it quantified and numerical. Once it's quantified and numerical, then it has authority because it's a number. And then once it has authority, kind of put power behind it. It's a very weird structure that we do. I think there is just a lot of things with that quantification are arbitrary than we come to, and that's the part that we got a math section.
I guess once point of view question. So far hard to make things quantifiable rule based. Yes. And computers that are so good acting. That any jobs that are based on getting some of them in this room could be automated.
Yeah.
Can you please repeat the question?
Yeah, you guys be quiet over there. We can't hear the question.
So yeah, I guess I'm just saying we've sort of, as a society, what do you suggest? How do we? Because I mean, a lot of jobs are now arguably largely automatable, or at least can be consolidated. One person with a lot of agents at their disposal to deal with all that bullshit we've created.
Well, okay, so that's quite why I think it's interesting where we're at. Which I should have I should add for the next version of this that slide on the agents. First of all those people were human calculators. They also they lost their jobs. But I think they found something else to do, or at least we found some. What?
Grace Wava, her first job was a computer. She idled computer.
And there you go. So I didn't know wow, that's amazing.
But there weren't that many people. There weren't that many people in the room.
Well, so I in one of the chapters.
Now it's like half of the job.
On the chapter of machine learning, I talk about Bell Labs' work in optical character recognition. Do you know why they were interested? What the project was? The first project was automating their billing pipeline. It used to be that in order to make a long distance call, there were people who would pick up the thing, know the number, and would plug it in, and then write down by hand the bill, and then someone else will go and then tabulate the billing charges for later. And this, they had a little project at Bell Labs to automate the reading of those bills. And that's what led, trust me, no spoilers, but that led to machine learning. That's how we invented machine learning. Anyway, that was the first problem they were trying to solve. So,
And we still are trying to automate the inverse linear.
And we're still, that's the North Star. And they still want your damn DocuSign. They still need you to check it off. So, but the reason I brought that up, telephone operators also is a job that doesn't exist. There are lots of jobs that don't. That
but again, that's a specialized job, and there's a specialized solution. Now we have pretty general computing capabilities, maybe AGI-ish.
Yeah, but the only job that seems to be going away is software engineer.
No, I think that's just the beginning.
Maybe. Well, that's the question. I also don't think software.
A good job.
I don't know.
A salesman job is not going away.
Somebody
has to talk you into that cost.
But I also feel like software engineering is not going to go away. This is not necessarily. I did not write about this, but this is my own little personal opinion. I do think that we're on year one of the coding agent. I think there's a lot of irrational exuberance, as there always is. But I don't know that we're like actually coming out of it. There's something funny about computer science, and why do we need more code? No one's been able to tell me this. It's like why do we need people to be putting more commits in? And I don't have a.
They get devaluated.
Because we quantified it that way.
But why do you need more papers?
Yeah.
Why do you need more neuroscience papers?
We don't. We don't need more NERSC papers, right? I think it's because we quantified it that way, which is again one of the issues. Once you create this thing, you've actually created a goal displacement problem, where now you just have like this other, like, why were we doing this? Oh, it doesn't matter. We're gonna do this now. We'll make that number go up. So I think it's tricky.
I mean, I agree. It's very tricky, but it is unclear how it's going to unfold.
I
Can
agree.
I speak to his the question that you made earlier about aspects of life that are perhaps unquantifiable? I'm a literature professor, so it's really hard being in a room full of mathematicians. And I'm really happy that your talk was quite legible. But I think I wanted to go back to that question. The problem with saying that there are aspects of life that are singular, right, is that you're absolutely right? But what I see with computation and digital technology in general is that anything can be quantifiable, right? Not in itself, but there is going to be the capacity to create some proxy that can stand in for that thing. And it's that thing that is quantifiable. And that the way that life or the way that our interaction with the world works, often we are okay interacting with the proxy.
Yeah.
And the example I use is social media, right? So you think about the way that social media has talked about connectivity as a thing. What is connectivity on social media? What is interaction with comments, with content? I pull out my phone, I tap on an app, I see a picture, I double tap on it, right? Double tap is an absolutely senseless gesture, right? But if you now make double tap as proxy for he likes said image, then me liking that image, which typically should not be quantifiable, which is a singular experience, suddenly becomes quantifiable.
Yeah.
So my worry is that because we are always working at the level of these kinds of computational proxy, life entirely can be, is computable.
Only
in a way that, worries me.
Only through this, though, right?
What did you say?
Only through this.
Only through, right.
Sometimes I do feel like I need to throw.
Right. That's so that life is, and this is where individuals, we can't put it on people, but the way that life is increasingly being oriented towards this, right?
Yeah.
It means that if this is where everything is happening, this is where I learn who to vote for, what jeans to buy, what my friends are doing, then all of a sudden, it becomes a really, really powerful machine. So I don't know, how can you speak to this sort of, maybe should I say surreptitious way in which ultimately life is still being reduced to this abstract computation.
Yeah, no, I think so. The reason why they do it, right? The reason why they invented those buttons is because they wanted to make legible what was happening at the edge. It's the same quantification paradox, or not paradox. Like, I mean, it's kind of like this like unavoidable, like, monster of quantification, where the data scientists at the companies wanted some way to know whether or not their designs were working. So they push stuff out to get this feedback at the edges, just so they can make their own, so they can push more code and make more money. And then it changes us, like in that interface design, right? So they're not at all getting whether or not we like anything. And this has been a problem with social media forever. That's not the information they get. They just get the information of whether we like something, right? And
they don't care, right? Whether we,
They used to say they did, but they've given, like, in the current era, they're very honest about how they don't care. They just want money to go up. So I think that it's funny how much that seeped into everything, and then it becomes this next thing where we start to think, well, I should be able to like make a little app for my house that has the same kind of little quantification. It's a very infectious idea that's very hard to kind of like pull ourselves out of. I think one of the most frustrating things about this book for me is that I found that I feel like I could give a good story about the origins and the history. I don't have an answer for how to get out. Like, and to some extent, I don't want to give an answer for how to get out, because I feel like that's not my. I don't know. I feel like that's also a little paternalistic of me. I don't necessarily have to like provide an answer, but it's like I feel like the more we talk about it and the more we surface it, I think that the better off we'll be. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, that was my thing. Is that if we become aware of how we are quantifying things, can we not like push through the bullshit of quantifying things and like really understand like what the product is or what we're truly trying to solve and improve, without like, oh, this thing 100 times better than doing it by hand. Like that, when I read something like that, I'm like, what does that even mean? 100 times better than. And I think as people get to know like these like quantifiable things, is actually nothing really matters at that point. I think you are pushing, that is the solution. That's a solution.
By that. Well, go ahead. What?
Okay, I have a completely different one.
Oh,
so you put this thing about rules versus play.
Yeah.
Maybe not many people don't know, but you are spend a lot of time with music.
Yeah.
My vague understanding of music is there are some rules that you kind of start with, but then there's an element of like creativity that goes on top of it.
That's right.
Is it really rules versus play, or is there like a more complex?
No, they play together, right? They play off each other. They're symbiotic. I guess it's like just distinguishing which is which, or like understanding that notion. They're definitely not. In fact, I think this is part of why I got so into this topic. I like rules. I like rituals. I love these are not causally related, but I've gotten very into strength training in my later years. Like that seems like that's just a thing that you just make a number go up. Turns out it's not. It's not, but whatever. There's rules, and in music it's the same thing. Like there's this concept that I love that was that I stole from these evolutionary biologists, which are called constraints that deconstrain. Such a very computer science term, which we can talk about later. But like it's the idea that if you put in some rules and it lets you do more things. By adding rules, you're eliminating choices, you're enabling diversity. There's all these different things. So like you can't, like, if we have this big society, we need some rules. You just got to know that the rules aren't just there to have rules. I think there's this tension, because I think I hate bureaucracy more than anyone, but I'm fascinated by it.
So I don't know what our gold standard for these decision making are. Suppose we say the gold standard is how humans will make decisions.
Yeah.
Right. Then at some point we will have to probably limit computation. I think we make decisions that are not right, because we don't allocate enough computation all the time. Right. We budget the amount of computation on any problem. Our brain does budget the amount of computation we allocate for any particular problem at a given time. Okay? And even if we had infinite compute power, at some point we will have to say, to solve this problem, I'm going to only do this one. Only then we will get an answer that looks like what humans will make a decision.
Yeah, I think that the hard part there is that I don't know if we necessarily need to build machines to mimic us. We always do. Like we always have. We always like kind of, but it's always a funny like caricatured mimicry of what people do. Like that's why I always love the paperclip optimizer. Like no person is a paperclip optimizer. It's ridiculous. But like a lot of the ideas behind building computers is mimicking people in one way or another. But I think that what we've seen is that like what computers are good at is almost. There are a lot of things that computers are better than people. Let's just be clear. There are certain decisions where computers are much better. So, for example, most statistical problems, computers are better. The problem is that you don't want to solve every problem with statistics. There's some things you do and some things you don't. And again, that decision of whether or not we're going to use a statistical decision or not is a value judgment. And that's the ones that you have to like. There's no way to escape the fact that we're in a society where you get to pick what those values. Right. So I don't want to say that like there are. I think there are lots of examples where, and it's clear, computers are better at multiplying numbers too. Right. There are things that computers are much better than people. There are decisions that computers are much better at making than people. We just have to decide whether or not those decisions are those are the kinds of problems that we want to be solving.
But the computers are better once we give them the objective that is crisply laid out.
Yeah, exactly. Yes.
Humans are making decisions, but there are objectives that are not clearly laid out.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
So I don't know whether our ultimate goal for all these decision making is to say we are satisfied with the decision making from a computer if they reflect what humans will do in some collective way. If that is the gold standard for what we want the computers to do, and then maybe we think of how we will list the objectives, how will we make decisions about which are the objectives, and so on.
But people do make those decisions, right? And we set the rules in place. We pick the rules. We pick the rules at this university. Somebody's picking the rules at this university, right? Faculty governance. Clearly, it's a faculty. It's all your fault, guy. Yeah, right. Yeah. No, anyway, but or at the government, the rules that the IRS they're delegated. I think actually one of the trickier parts, and I think one of the parts that makes this stuff so complicated, is that we live in such a complex society that we've delegated the rules from lawmaking. Lawyers don't make elected officials don't make the rules. There are there are bureaucratic bodies, which makes them a little scary, that are like non-elected, that make a lot of the rules, but they've been entrusted through Congress with they have oversight by Congress.
What about the Supreme Court? I'm sorry. They abolished the rule.
True, right? So that's an interesting one. They don't ever make rules, right? They just abolish rules, which is really they have a real crude hammer.
Well, you could argue that school busing was kind of derived distantly from some constitutional principle. So they made that rule.
That makes sense. Yeah.
But today, like abolishing the Voting Rights Act seems to be.
They get to break the rules, right? Or they smash them, right? So they get to, and I don't know why. Well, whatever quirks of the system. How we made the rules that we would have this weird unelected body in there is also very odd. But
that was something that evolved. It wasn't like part of original.
But it was there by the time we had the Constitution, yeah.
Well, no, for the Marbury decision.
Oh, I
see. 1630s.
Yeah.
Sort of arrogated to the.
Yeah.
That's unique.
Yes. Yeah, around it.
Yeah, I have a question that kind of goes also back to the earlier questions and discussions. So we measure things that we can measure.
Yeah.
And we attribute them as proxies that we don't know how to even quantify or measure. Like even like that example of like the likes or engagement.
Yeah.
That. So I was wondering if you could comment on how those decisions that can lead to actually bad consequences at individual level, like societal level. And we know this for social media, right? Like in terms of like what happens to teenagers, what happens to also like adults, like an addiction and many of these things that have actually bad consequences to society. But because of different ways the economy works, we still tend to continue to do it. And I was curious about your thoughts on why do we?
So I'm going to quote my good friend Kevin Baker, who's a historian of technology, has this amazing quote that I say all the time, which is that absurdity is not self-correcting. And I think that, or sorry, I'm butchering it. I put two together. Yeah, I think he actually said Yes, he said absurdity is not self-correcting, and systems can persist in dysfunction indefinitely. And I think that both of those are true. Both of those are true. And he did that in a article that was ostensibly about AI for science, but was more about citation metrics. And that is good because like you guys are all in the room and you were all subject to it. It makes no sense. H index is something you could run reinforcement learning on. I have a reinforcement learning colleague who did it and got tenure. Yeah, everybody knows who that is. But like you could run. So it's a simple objective. You could run reinforcement learning on it. Who gives a shit? Like what? Why? And how did that happen? And it was all very well intentioned when we started making these citation metrics because there was a lot of information and we want to make it legible for people and to so we could really understand who is having impact. Which what is impact? How are we going to quantify impact? Well, just citation count. And as you start to make these metrics and everybody, next thing you know, now that's all that matters is citation count, which has not. What does that have to do with anything? But then that's the number that we make bigger. That's the goal. The goal is citation count, not whatever this other abstract thing was. So that's my favorite example of just like a completely absurd system. It doesn't make any sense. It's completely detached from what we started, but it started off very well intentioned.
This function is a stable equilibrium. That's why.
Yeah. Well, it's an unstable equilibrium. As you could look at by the number of applications to number of submissions to the AI conferences. Unstable equilibrium.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm curious if you've given any thought to the concept of liability in the sense that people in the US are so worried about people in companies are so worried about getting sued. And so a lot of sort of processes and decisions are outsourced to shield them from responsibility. I'm curious how this fits in and if you've given any thought to that.
That's an interesting question. It's an interesting question because it's so funny to see there are some companies who are not afraid. There are lots of companies that are not afraid of being sued. That's a very Elon model. And I think a lot of Silicon Valley is taking it. I think the reason why OpenAI was successful was they were much less afraid of being sued than Google was. Google had all the technology already. And we actually knew about it because it was leaked in the Washington Post, but they were too afraid because it was trained on a lot of copyrighted stuff, they were too afraid to release it. And so we associate the chatbot with OpenAI and not Google. It's weird, right? So liability is funny. It's an interesting. I think I understand the concern. It's very interesting that we're in this Elon age where a lot of companies they just assume they're like, bring it on. I love that we're right now in the middle of Altman and Elon, two people who are unafraid of being suing each other. It's happening right now. Yeah, sorry, I don't have a better answer about that. I just feel like it is. Again, I'm giving you my weird Bay Area perspective where things have just devolved into anarchy.
Yeah, I had kind of more of a.
Sorry, Steve just said King Kong versus Godzilla. That's exactly what's happening. Yeah,
I had more of a comment than a question. Yeah. Like when you said that it was easier to lay out things that were done in the 40s than to make sense of what is going to happen next. I mean, that makes perfect sense to me because you have all this selection bias, right? Yeah. So you can say now what were the things that had a big impact, but predicting what's going to happen in the future, we're extraordinarily bad at that. Yeah. And I mean, things go in either direction. Look at all the futuristic things from the 1980s, let's say, and how people were imagining what the future would look like. And we were always imagining these sterile environments, cyborgs working and such. But we plant trees inside the buildings.
Yeah.
Right? We had things that were super polluted that managed to recover. We optimized production of pretty much everything, but we still want to buy beer from microbreweries and small batch coffee, which we appreciate things that are authentic. And so I don't think that we as a species even understand ourselves enough, and it just seems futile to try to make long-term predictions. We're very good at short-term predictions, but long-term predictions go their way. 100%. I don't know if you have a comment.
No, I have a similar discussion in the book. It's really interesting. Like the one I like to harp on that I talk about in the book is that right next to each other, there's there's a celebration of MIT's 100th anniversary where they make all sorts of predictions about what's going to happen next week. And they're already telling you that AGI will be there. There's this one guy talking about how his daughter is going to marry a robot. Anyway, 1960s, right? And there are all these predictions. There's Claude Shannon talking about how we're going to have AGI in like a couple years, and nothing there has even come true yet, even in our current stage. Right at the same time, Gordon Moore publishes a paper about cramming transistors into small spaces. I can't remember the title, but something about cramming transistors. And he's making this prediction that we'll have like digital watches and like personal computers and like cruise control. And it's like everything in his abstract comes true. And it's just so interesting to see like which ones are there and which ones aren't. And it's like almost like you really like, to optimize, you kind of actually have to have a glimpse of already. I was like, okay, I'm just gonna go from here down by a few orders of magnitude. Maybe I can get that. Whereas
it's like this all, right? Because we can now say, oh, this person was right.
But we can also ask why. I do think we can ask why. And I think part of the thing with Gordon Moore, like it was like a lot of those technologies already existed, and we just had to figure out how to make them smaller, as opposed to these other things which we just couldn't even yet frame.
They're more abstract.
Yeah.
And Gordon Moore had the power to make whatever his predictions true. I mean,
Yes, that's right. That's right. They have a whole industry behind it, making that predictions true every 2 years.
It's, you trace all of the development back to the 40s and
Okay.
kind of like sort of a bit of an antecedent. There's in the 20s with Ramsey and Keynes that sort of try to put axiomatic decision theory and try to lay everything on a logical foundation. But to some extent, right, we're clear like none of this is how humans make decisions. So I'm curious, do you think you can axiomatize and lay on decision making?
No, I don't. No, I don't. And I think it's really interesting to watch that lineage. Yeah. And I think so much of it comes through this like axiomatization statistics. Because like
Savage tried and
exactly, but so did Ramsey and Keynes, right? And they had their different opinions about it. Yeah, I think that to me is actually the big philosophical question that we.
But I think
like what Sam was